This is how it begins. Or, perhaps more accurately, this is how the story was told in our particular family when I was very young, because since that time I have heard endless variations upon the tale across the face of the peninsula. Truth takes many forms, it seems, although even the most quarrelsome of our scholars can agree between themselves on a few base details. It always begins at dusk, in the mist and the cool, on the verge of the falling darkness, and we're standing here upon the flats of the lower delta with a promised bride looking out across the endless water. She's been warned all her life about coming here, to the banks of the great nameless river, because the river, to the lifelong and generational enmity of the people who live in the broken village, will not obey. During the harvest season, it floods its banks, drowning their fields in rich, sluggish silt. During the planting season, it retreats sulkily out of sight, leaving behind parched ditches of cracked mud for the farmers to pick over. Fish, when they do come up wrong, either on the surface or when you split them open. Wicked children who dare to play in the shallows usually come back safe and sound to the broken village, but there are occasional days and nights when they don't, and their grieving families will carry out a fruitless search across the reeds, uncovering a complete absence of bodies or footprints, but stumbling upon freshly discarded debris that seems to have come from another place and time entirely. Old glass bottles, wheels of twisted black rubber, the coiled, slippery bodies of ancient eels, and strange, twitching crabs. All across the face of the peninsula, scattered and hidden, are tenuous places, and this is a tenuous place, if ever there was one. She should not be here, lingering upon the cusp of dark and impossible depths. She's been forbidden against coming here alone, but today she needs to be alone, and this is the only place for miles that's lonely enough, because tomorrow is her wedding day, and her long white dress is waiting for her upon her bed, and her relatives have flocked to town from all across the countryside. She has nowhere else to go. Murder, or a lightning strike, or simply sinking accidentally into the silt. Something needs to happen to her to stop what's coming tomorrow. Her tears strike the dark water, the surface breaks and changes, and in the spreading ripples, she sees a reflection that is not her own. There is a garden beneath the river. It's been there all along, she realizes, waiting for her to become capable of seeing it. And the things that grow and flourish down there are living and bright like nothing that grows above. And the one who tends the garden is brighter and more beautiful than any man could possibly be. The girl looks down. The trawler man looks back up. Future generations will argue about exactly how he is portrayed, with certain depictions tending towards the ornately angelic or even the monstrously crustacean. But I like the simplicity of how it was taught to me. A figure that's always still and never certain. The trawler man wears a grey mackintosh and a hood, and it ripples and changes with the currents, just as his skin ripples and changes. He turns one face towards you when he wants to speak, and another face when he wants to listen. "Why are you crying?" he asks, and when he's spoken he turns the first of his faces away from her. "Tomorrow is the day of going forth," the promised bride tells him, which means that tomorrow I will be married, and I know that this is a certainty, because all of the arrangements have already been made, and everyone keeps telling me how happy I must be at last. But I also know that it can't be true, because this is not who I am. It's not who I will ever be. I cannot give myself up to be shaped by this match and this commitment. I cannot be bound into this life that they have planned for me. Then become something else, the trawler man says, with the first of his two faces. "My currents are kind and your flesh is pliant. I will make you something that cannot be bound." "But I'm afraid," the promised bride replies. "I have seen the bodies that come back from below. I have seen the obscene outcomes of the dreadful river. The trolley man laughs and says, "They send you to your factories and fields to harden your palms, burden your back, and choke your lungs. They strip you of your dignity and turn your hair white and your gums bloody as they rot you from within. Why should their outcomes be natural, and mine obscene?" The young bride says, "But either way, I become a vessel, for your purposes or for theirs." The trolley man tells her, and his smile is kind. "You are a vessel, no more than that. To be anything else would be in excess of your own nature. Come, bear me a gift, and I will leave you something in return." He extends a sodden hand. One of his smiles is kindly. The promised bride turns and gazes out over the empty plains, back towards the road that will lead her to the broken village and her wedding day tomorrow. She turns back again and plunges downwards into the garden beneath the river. And then it's time. The bridegroom is waiting at the altar in his votive robes, the garlands of myrtle and rosehip strung around his neck. He is here alone in the small stone chapel that has been chosen as representative of his family's faith. The bride is late. The guests are late. It's inexplicable. No, not inexplicable. He's all too aware that the flood tides of the river can sometimes leak up onto the causeway, delaying travelers, and you need to be understanding about these things outside our control. He will not lose his temper. Not on today of all days. Nothing will be allowed to spoil what comes next. His promised bride, become his chosen wife, beautiful and kind, the envy of other couples, a divine example to the desperate and the lonely. Children, one after the other. A firm path forwards for his life at last. He can see it ahead of him, as certain as if it's already happening. But it isn't happening. The bridegroom stands patiently. He steps out into the aisle, peering out through the open chapel door, then retreats back to his place. Finally, cursing gently under his breath, he strides out of the chapel and stands in the morning sunlight. Fear comes next, after fury. Because it's entirely possible, after all, that he has been tricked. Perhaps they've all been playing a prank on him. Perhaps his promised bride is not coming after all, and he's been abandoned here, a laughingstock of the entire village. How could they do this to him? How could they dare? And then, as the bridegroom glares out over the road, quite suddenly he feels relief. Because distant shapes are visible now, over the sodden flats rising up over the horizon of the long road that cuts through the water. Yes, the wedding guests are approaching. They march aloft. Shimmering rivers of silt are falling from the empty sockets of their faces. Tears and vomit and phlegm, all of it transmuted. The wedding guests are coming in upon the road, walking on the towering, elegant pincer legs of newborn angels. Their spines are sunk and merged into potched blue and purple shell, their eyes reaching upwards in celebration upon lofty stalks of flesh. Their empty faces turned up to the sky, their hands clapping in sequence to mark the march's beat. The church bells are ringing from above. The church bells are ringing from beneath. And as the bridegroom staggers back aghast, he sees the angels part, and his promised bride comes forward to the head of the procession, swept inland upon new, towering legs, smiling as she strides forward to meet him. He turns, quaking with terror, screaming the names of absent friends and gods, and tries to run. But the ground has become uncertain. His feet sink into sludge and water. The bride's pincer leg thrusts through his shin, piercing flesh and splitting bone. The bridegroom topples. Thick delta mud soaks his vestments. His eyes are wide and helpless. The shadow of the river falls over him, fills every inch of him, and when it's done with him, it passes on. Presently, the bridegroom gets to his feet. With freshly stumbling, uncertain steps, Sultan water oozing from his trouser legs and empty sockets, he staggers after the procession. The wedding marches gloriously on, making its way inland, meeting new guests in the hills and the flatlands, growing as it goes. These are the Salt verses, and this is how it begins.